In this video we will be taking a look at former Soviet and today Russian tank T-80, and we are going to take a look at the problems the tank used to have and the problems the tank has today. Before we start, I want to note that this video won't involve the infamous Battle of Grozny, because it was not the tank's fault, since the tanks were sent with no infantry support to fight ex-Soviet soldiers armed with RPGs shooting them from tall buildings. If any other tank went instead of T-80, the result would be pretty much the same. What this video will involve though is a word about a sponsor. This video is sponsored by War Thunder. War Thunder is a military vehicle combat online game. It is free to play on PC, PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. Not to mention that it is cross-platform between PC and consoles. The game features an incredible arsenal of more than 1500 historically accurate playable tanks, aircraft, helicopters and ships from 1930s to 1990s. Best thing about the game are its realistic physics and one of the most detailed and immersive vehicle damage models in gaming. If you use my link to register, you will receive a bonus, a premium vehicle, tank, aircraft or ship, as well as a 3-day account boost. The game is completely free, so nothing is stopping you. You can start playing immediately. The only problem with T-80 tanks until modern era is the fact that they lacked thermal imaging system for the gunner, while it was present in pretty much all Western tanks. Other than that, all T-80 tank variants were either on par with the best tanks in the world of their time or even better. Check out my video on Cold War tanks if you want to know more. But in 1991, T-80 UK tank appeared, which did have a thermal sight for the gunner. But all other T-80U tanks remained pretty much the same during the 90s. Basic T-80U tanks don't have thermal for the gunner, and they were the ones that were produced the most. Only T-80UM and T-80UK tanks that were made in small numbers in the 90s have a GAVA 2 thermal sight for the gunner. The rest, or the vast majority, don't. The biggest problem about this is that a lot of those basic T-80U tanks are still in active service. In early 2000s, T-80UE1 tank appeared, which introduced an improved autoloader and a new gun, which gave the tank ability to fire longer APF-SDS projectiles, as well as second generation thermal for the gunner. Now, the problem with this is that at the time almost all NATO tanks had Commander's Independent Thermal Viewer, or CITV for short, which, as the name suggests, gives the commander his own independent thermal sight. As I already said, T-80UE had thermal only for the gunner. The commander of the tank had access to third generation passive night vision sight, which gives him ability to see in the dark, but it is not nearly as good as thermal sight, especially for the panoramic sight, which the commander can use to look around for targets. Now, some people are led to believe that CITV is required for the hunter-killer ability for modern tanks. This is seriously misguiding. A possible reason why a lot of people are led to believe that that's the case is because this term was first used for M1A2, which had CITV introduced back in 1992. And in possibly all descriptions of CITV, you can find that it gave Abrams the hunter-killer ability. But that's the case for the Abrams. Before, M1A1 tanks did not really have the hunter-killer ability, since the commander didn't have his own panoramic sight. Both Leopard 2A4 and T-80U had panoramic sights, which commander could use to sway the turret with a push of a button, which technically is a hunter-killer ability. So that in particular is not a problem for the T-80. But as I said, a lack of thermal imaging system for the panoramic sight is problematic because of target spotting. Now we come to the main issue, which are the most modern T-80 tank variants. Just a couple of years ago, T-80 BVM tank was revealed, and it was said that a lot of tanks will be upgraded to that level. At the first glance, the tank might appear to be quite decent. It has new relic explosive reactive armor, new gun, new engine, improved sights, etc. But the reality is rather cruel. Possibly the biggest reason for this tank being, well, bad, is the fact that they chose all T-80 BV tanks as the basis for the upgrade. Biggest problem with this is the lack in protection of the tank, especially the turret, since the turret was introduced on T-80B in 1978. That's right, 1978, it's the same old turret like that one. Now, the hull isn't as bad since it was improved in 1985, and T-80U uses pretty much the same hull armor, but the fact that they chose T-80BV over T-80U, which has much better turret armor and better overall design of the turret, is mind-boggling. T-80B uses a simple cast steel turret with a cavity filled with quartz. That's all there is to it. It's an old combination K design and, although it was good, it can no longer compete with modern composites. For T-80U, it is a different story. The turret, although still cast, has much better design. The area of composite armor has been made taller and the roof has become flatter, which increases the overall protection of the turret. And the composite armor is much more modern with ceramic filler with air pockets and high harness steel plates, one in between two fillers and one at the back of the composition. This kind of armor offers around 100mm more of APF SDS and heat protection. Now, together with Relict, the protection would have been much better. If we take that Relict reduces 40% of APF SDS penetration, we would have around 630mm of protection with T-80BV, but around 730mm with T-80U against APF SDS. You don't need me to tell you that this is much better. Of course, those values are not the same for every projectile, and Relict won't affect every projectile the same, but this is only to give you an idea of how much better the protection of T-80U is. And yet here we are, T-80BV tanks are being upgraded and T-80U tanks are being left the way they have always been, since the late 80s. What is also confusing is the fact that a lot of T-80U tanks already have the improved engine. Since 1989, T-80U tanks were made with the same engine that they are upgrading the T-80BV tanks with. And in the period since the tank's introduction in 1985 until 1989, not that many were made. The production peaked during the 90s and the tanks were made in hundreds, which is also taking away the idea that they chose T-80BV tanks because of the numbers. I mean, they aren't making many of them to begin with. They should have somewhere around 100 of them until the end of this year, and they are allegedly being upgraded since 2018. Another big problem is that this tank doesn't have a thermal sight for the commander. That's right, it doesn't have a CITV in 2020. Not to mention that it doesn't even have a digital display for the commander, which practically all modern tanks have. I mean, Arjun has it, Arjun. Seriously, who thought T-80 BVM is a good idea? This should have ended up as one of those forgotten prototypes. Don't forget to check out War Thunder, where you can take control of many land, air or naval vehicles. Use the link from the description to get a premium vehicle and a 3-day account boost when you register. Remember, the game is completely free for PC, PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. Just download and play. So at the end, the biggest problem with T-80 tanks is their current situation. T-80 BVM for some reason exists, and T-80U tanks, which have a lot of potential, are left the way they have always been. Most of them don't even have thermal sight for the gunner and still use older guns that can fire 3BM42 Mango at best. And yet, they gave new guns and autoloaders to T-80 BVM so it can shoot new 3BM59 Svinets 1. I think the reason behind this is that no one cares. The factory that produced T-80 tanks, Omsk Transmash, went bankrupt in the late 90s. A thing that was supposed to save them was a Black Eagle tank, but it was way too expensive to mass produce, so it failed, making the factory go bankrupt. You know, it seems to me that those people back then used to care, but since it went bankrupt, their main competitor, Ural Vagon Zavod, that produced T-72 and then T-90 tanks, bought them, and of course, they don't care, at least not nearly as much as the OG Omsk Transmash people. And that has led to the current situation. And since the T-80BV tanks have been getting near their scrapping, UVZ probably thought they could grab some cash from Russian MOD by selling them the upgrades to those tanks instead of the T-80U tanks, since those can still push around for a while. But I don't know, I'm just theorizing at this point. Let me know what you think in the comments.
Can't come in here. Not allowed in here.
I just wanted the upgrades.
Not allowed. It's not allowed.
Gran don't like you.
And that would be all. If you like my content, you can consider supporting me on Patreon. If you can't, just leave a like or subscribe if you're new. And I will see you all in the next video. Have a nice day.